So now we're going to be looking at the respiratory system and all the functions that relate to the respiratory system. The respiration is the process of exchanging gas between the atmosphere, the air that's around the body, and the cells inside the body, and it requires a number of steps for this to happen. So the first step is that we have to move air into the lungs, and we refer to that process as ventilation or breathing. So breathing or ventilation is all about getting the gases that are outside the body drawn into the lungs. Once the air is in the lungs, then, we have to exchange the gases that are found in the air and in the blood between each other. And so external respiration is the process by which we move oxygen from the air that's in the spaces of the lungs and carbon dioxide, and we move it into the blood. So we're moving oxygen from the air spaces in the lungs to the blood, and we're moving carbon dioxide from the blood into the air spaces of the lungs. So that's external respiration, where we're exchanging gases with the external air. Then the blood has to move from the lungs out to the peripheral tissues, to the muscles, to the glands, to the organs of the body. And once the blood makes it to those peripheral tissues and makes it to a capillary network, then we see what's referred to as internal respiration occurring. And with internal respiration, we're exchanging now the gas that has been moved into the blood gets moved into the peripheral tissue fluids. And then from there, it will move into the cells that are out there in those peripheral tissues. So oxygen moves from the blood into the body fluids and then on into the cells where we're going to use that oxygen to help make ATP. And carbon dioxide, which is produced inside the cell, moves from the cell into the peripheral tissues, fluids, and then on into the blood there in the capillary network. So internal respiration is a gas exchange inside the body from the blood into the cells of the tissues, and gas exchange of CO2 from the internal environment of the cells on into the lungs. And then the last form of respiration that occurs is referred to as cellular respiration. And this is the process where we actually use the glucose that we carry in the blood to the cells, along with the oxygen that's been exchanged. We use those two ingredients to build ATP, and along the way we produce a lot of waste carbon dioxide. And all of this, of course, is happening at the organelle. Think for a minute. You can pause your video if you like. It's in the mitochondria. So cellular respiration is when we burn glucose with oxygen in order to make ATP. So what are the functions then of the respiratory system? Well, the first and most obvious one is that it provides a very large gas exchange surface that allows us to exchange the CO2 and the carbon dioxide between the blood and the air. Second, all of the work of the respiratory system, or much of the work of the respiratory system, is about getting the air that we find in the external environment into the body. Excuse me. Third, we have processes and structures that are involved in protecting the respiratory surface from pathogens, from dust material, particles that are in the air, and then also warms up and moistens that air. The gas exchange surfaces have to be kept moist, and they work best when they are warm. And so a lot of the function that we'll see, especially of the nasal passages, is to get that air pre-warmed and humidified so that even on the coldest days, as we're breathing in through the nose, we're actually preparing the air so that it is not damaging to the very sensitive respiratory surfaces. And then, of course, we also have hairs and cilia and mucus, as we've talked about a fair bit, that work together to prevent particles, to prevent bacteria and other pathogens from being able to penetrate into the tissues. And then we've got some smaller functions. There's communication. It's because of the respiratory system that we're able to talk and sing and do all the amazing things that we can do with our voice. It's also involved in the sense of smell. So up in the nasal passages, which are part of the upper respiratory system, we have the olfactory surfaces, and so the processes of breathing are also distributing the chemicals that are making the smells that we experience. And then it's also involved in regulating the pH of blood, and so that's kind of where we'll wind up this chapter, is looking at how when we dissolve carbon dioxide into water, it makes an acid, and when we breathe out carbon dioxide, it removes acid from the body. So it's closely involved with pH regulation, and that has some interesting consequences for people who are experiencing acidosis around the respiratory system. So we'll talk a little bit about all that stuff. Okay, so let's first look at what the organs of the respiratory system are, and we'll start with the upper respiratory tract. This is everything that's above or superior to the pharynx, is the upper respiratory tract. And we'll start with the nose. The nose is a structure that is, it's got a lot of semi-rigid support. There's the nasal bone up at the top of the nose, the bridge of the nose, that provides some of the nose support. But if you kind of feel and play around with the tip of your nose, you probably heard me getting nasally as I started playing with the tip of my nose, you'll notice that it's much more flexible. It's composed of hyaline cartilage. So if you remember from the 3 cartilage types that we looked at, hyaline cartilage was probably the toughest of the 3 cartilages. We also find in the nose very coarse guard hairs that help to filter out large airborne particles. I know when I'm working in my wood shop and I'm doing lots of sanding or cutting, that when I go to blow my nose later on, there's a lot. I mean, there's a whole tree that comes out of there. So the guard hairs do a great job of slowing down the flow of the air enough that large particles don't get breathed deep into the body. The nostrils, or the external nares, which is how you would say that nares term, these are the openings into the nasal cavity that allow us to breathe in the air that's around us. Okay, so, and by the way, if you're looking in your book, we are on page, once again, I left my book in my bag. We're on page 732, that's figure 19.2, and figure 19.1 is also helpful for this part of the chapter. So you can trace your way through the upper respiratory system using those 2 figures. Nasal cavity is divided into left and right by the nasal septum, the cartilage and bone that is that middle piece of tissue there in between the nostrils. The nasal cavity is lined with pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. So that means it's a simple epithelium, but it appears to be stratified because some of the cells are tall and columnar, others are shorter, more squat, more cuboidal. And and it's ciliated, so it's there at the apical surface we have a very active layers of cilia that and then there's a lot of mucus produced. So this is a mucous membrane. And so one of the functions as you breathe in through your nose is that there's a lot of blood supply to a mucous membrane, so they're warmer, they're very moist. That moisture and warmth transfer to the air that we're breathing in, and then any small bits of dust or other small particles will get trapped in that mucus layer, and then the cilia will wave and push the dust and materials. Since it's coming from the nasal cavity, that would push it downward. If we were looking deeper in the lower respiratory system, and then pushing the weight, or these particles, they'd be pushing them up. And so as the cilia wave, they push food down toward the pharynx, and then once they push these particles down toward the pharynx, and then in the pharynx, a little swallow, and everything goes right down the esophagus. So also in the nasal cavity, and these are hanging off of or projecting from the septum, are the nasal conchae. And that's how you say that. It's con and then key, just like a key to a car, is how you pronounce that second syllable. So the nasal conchae, also referred to as the turbinate bones, there's a superior, middle, and an inferior nasal concha. There are 3 of them. These bits of bone and cartilage, they have the effect of slowing down the air, causing not nice, smooth, laminar flow, but turbulent flow. So if we think about a river, here's the river bottom, here's the water in the river. The water in the river, all the particles are flowing smoothly. The layers of the water don't get rippled up or roiled together. But if you have a rock in the middle of the river, then the water comes to the rock and then has to flow around it. And so that creates really messy flow. And you get lots of swirls downstream, lots of turbulent flow, if you can imagine that. Well, the same thing is happening to the air. So the air becomes turbulent thanks to the work of the turbinates, the nasal conchae, and that slows the flow of air. We see this in a river as well, because right behind a large rock, there can be an eddy where there's almost no movement of water downstream. Instead, it just swirls in around itself. And so if this were a turbinate covered with a mucous membrane, then that swirl of water would pick up the warmth that is coming from the mucous membranes that overlay the turbinate bones. All right, so we slow down the air, and that increases the efficiency then of all of this cleaning, moistening, warming, trapping that is being done by these mucous membranes. So turbulent flow and that slower flow is very, very adaptive for helping to clean up or to warm up and humidify, to air condition that air. Okay, so associated with the nasal passages are the nasal sinuses, and these are cavities in the bone of the head that are also lined with a mucous membrane, and so they produce lots of mucus, and again, it's these secretions that help to moisten and warm the air. Any air that gets caught up in the sinuses is going to become very warm, and so as it comes out of the sinuses, it's going to carry that warmth down toward the lungs. So the function of the sinuses is that they help to reduce the weight of the skull. They have this assist, or provide this assist in warming and moistening the air. And then they also give the qualities of our voices, both our singing voice and our speaking voice. So every person has a different sounding voice because the shape and the size of each person's nasal cavities are going to be really different. And so there's resonating that happens. The sound bumps back and forth, kind of echoes around inside of the sinuses. And that creates, either this really nasally tone of people because of how they speak, or a warm, rich sound that, okay, I'll stop trying to be an actor now, but I hope you get what I'm saying. The reason that some singers sound so round and mellow, while others sound really sharp and bright, a lot of that has to do with the size and shape of their nasal cavities. So as air is breathed in through the nostrils, goes through the nasal cavities, goes past the sinuses, and then down toward the pharynx. And if you remember from the digestive system, the pharynx is the is the cavity or the chamber, the shared chamber that is used both by the digestive system and by the respiratory system. All right, so that's the upper respiratory tract. The lower respiratory tract is from the pharynx down, or below the pharynx, and just like the nasal cavity, it's aligned with mucous membranes that are ciliated, so we've got a pseudostratified epithelium there. The particles that are trapped in the pharynx, they are moved upward to be swallowed into the stomach and dealt with. And it's dealt with by the acids and the enzymes of the stomach. So similar setup, just has to, rather than moving materials downward, this time this ciliary elevator brings particles up out of the lungs to be then swallowed down into the stomach. So the structures of the lower respiratory tract include the larynx. The larynx is if you put your hand to your throat and you feel the projection we talk about as the Adam's apple, that's where the larynx is found, and it's an enlarged passageway that allows air to move into the trachea and out of the trachea. The larynx is attached to the hyoid bone, so if you think about that bone, that the one bone that doesn't attach, or one of the bones that doesn't attach to other bones in the body, but and if you feel around, you may be able to kind of make that out. Some people can, it just depends. But it is composed, the larynx is composed of cartilages and smooth muscle, all bound together by connective tissues. And the role of these cartilages then is to hold this tube open, because we're going to start looking at pressure differentials soon. If there is a great pressure differential, then in the inhale, the trachea could just wind up flapping shut, or falling shut, and that would be bad. So we have cartilages. There's the thyroid cartilage. It's the largest. It's found just under the thyroid gland, and this is the one that we describe as the Adam's apple. There's also cricoid cartilage. These are the cartilages of the larynx that are most inferior. And then the epiglottic cartilage is the very center or the core of the epiglottis. So if you're looking in the book, page 735 shows you the thyroid and the cricoid cartilages. You can see where the hyoid bone is in relation to the thyroid cartilage, so it's fairly high up in the neck area. And if you turn the page to, let's see, where is it? Yeah. Oh, there it is. It's back on the page 732, figure 19.2. You can see the cartilage that's there at the center of the epiglottis. It looks white. It looks like you could, don't confuse it for a bone. The bones are kind of brownish colored, but the white stuff, that's the cartilage. And then there are other cartilages as well, but those are the ones that I want you to be familiar with as they are associated with the larynx. Other terms associated with the larynx include the term glottis. The glottis is the hole that air goes through as it leaves the pharynx and moves into the larynx. The epiglottis is a scrap of tissue that helps to mostly cover the glottis so that it forms like a little ramp. As we swallow, it lays over, forms a ramp, and materials can make their way anteriorly toward the, let me try that again. When the epiglottis flops over, it's while we're swallowing, and it makes a little ramp that helps to move materials posteriorly toward the esophagus. And so it helps to prevent food and water from entering into the larynx. Also surrounding the opening of the epiglottis, we have two layers of vocal folds. Vocal folds are pairs of muscles and connective tissue that help to seal closed the glottis if we need to completely close it. The first set of vocal folds, these are the ones that actually are the entrance into the glottis, are called the false vocal cords, and so they open and close to seal off the glottis. The true vocal cords are inferior to these false vocal cords, and they're the ones that, as they vibrate, they make the sounds that we associate with the voice. Okay, so air has been breathed in through the nostrils into the nasal cavity, down through the pharynx, into the larynx, through the glottis, and now it is traveling down the trachea. So the trachea is a really tough, flexible tube. It's composed of muscle and connective tissue, and then it has this C-shaped rings in them, so multiple C-shaped rings that help to hold the trachea open. And so these cartilages are shaped like this. So if this is the trachea, we're looking down the barrel of the trachea toward the lungs. This is the posterior, so here on the posterior side we have the esophagus, it's flat, so here's the spine. So I'm going to just draw a big old vertebra. So this is vertebra. And then up here is the skin of the neck. So the cartilage itself is kind of embedded in the animal body. It's there inside of a layer of muscle, so it's all kind of connected into the tube itself, and it's got a C shape. It doesn't completely enclose the trachea, and this is very adaptive because when we swallow food, here's the cartilage ring. Cartilage ring is still holding the trachea open, but now the esophagus, and that's the esophagus, can kind of bulge into the windpipe, into the trachea, to allow this, to allow material to pass when we swallow it. So this is like a little, it's just a little fail-safe to make sure that the esophagus can get as large as it needs to be in order to pass a bolus of food. So if the larynx gets blocked, then there's a potential that you may have to do something called a tracheostomy. Ostomy is the surgical is a surgery that creates a hole in a hollow organ, and so a tracheostomy is pushing a hole from the front to open a new airway. So we can put a tube in, and now air can flow through the tube into the trachea, and we bypass wherever the obstruction that may have blocked up the trachea came from. Okay, so trachea, long tube, very easy to recognize because it has these rings of cartilage in it. And so when we do our cat and pig dissection, I think you'll have no trouble finding the trachea at all. So the trachea leads then into the bronchial tree, called a tree because if you look at it upside down, it has a tree-like appearance. If you look on page 737, figure 19.8, you'll see what I mean. So immediately in the mediastinum, right before getting to the lungs themselves, the trachea makes a branch, and we have a right and left as a response to that, main or primary bronchus. So here's the trachea, right and left primary bronchi. And then the lungs are built on the right side out of 3 lobes. On the left side, slightly smaller lung, and there's only 2 lobes. So as the bronchi enter the lungs, there is another split that produces branches that are headed toward each of the lobes. And so these are referred to as lobar bronchi. So here's a right superior lobar bronchus, the right inferior lobar bronchus, and the right middle lobar bronchus. Because there's only 2 lobes in the left lung, then we're going to see only 2. The the left superior lobar bronchus and the left inferior lobar bronchus. That still resembles the bronchi and the trachea in that there are a number of I'm sorry, I just lost track of what I was saying. So right and left, the first branch points off the main bronchi are the lobar bronchi, and then from the lobar bronchi there are smaller bronchioles that extend that then carry the air to all parts of that lobe. And the same thing is happening here in this lobe. Where in this lobe we branch immediately and begin to produce smaller and smaller branches that are delivering air throughout the lungs. These next level are the tertiary bronchi. So primary bronchi, secondary bronchi head to the lobes, tertiary bronchi fill the lobes with smaller tubes that get the air everywhere. Until we get down to this next level, at which point there, the thing that distinguishes a bronchiole from a bronchus is that the bronchi have the cartilage rings, while a bronchiole doesn't. So the wall, rather than being composed of muscle and cartilage rings, is composed only of muscle and or primarily of muscle, smooth muscle. And because it's smooth muscle, it's all under involuntary control. So it's not something that we can think to make the bronchioles dilate. We have to hit it with a little, with some hormone or a medication, or give it some autonomic stimulation in order to get them to dilate or to constrict. Okay, so still thinking about the bronchial tree here, and when we get down now to, and you'll turn the page again, page 739 and 738 have images that help us to understand what's going on in the bronchial tree as we get down to the alveoli. So the bronchioles continue to divide, getting smaller and smaller, until they become what are referred to as the alveolar ducts, which lead directly to alveolar sacs. The alveolar ducts are very thin tubes built primarily of a single layer of epithelial tissue. The alveolar sacs, these are sacs that are found at the end of the alveolar ducts, very thin-walled, and they make up the largest amount of the lungs, and they give the lungs both a spongy feeling and appearance. The alveoli are the individual bits of the alveolar sac that are the places where we do all of the gas exchange, and so it's a spot where the lung tissue, very thin, it's a simple squamous epithelium at this point. So the alveolar sacs are built of simple pushing a button on my pen, I think. A simple squamous epithelium. So that means it's got a thin layer of cells and a protein basement membrane, and that's it. And it is surrounded by a capillary network, and the capillary network shares that basement membrane with the lung, the alveolus, and it is also lined by a layer of simple squamous epithelium, so that when air comes into the alveolus, the O2 will move into the blood, and when air is held within, or breathed out again, it takes away the carbon dioxide that we've put back into the air. And the cells here secrete a material called surfactant. Surfactant, I think I've drawn the analogy toward the jet dry stuff that we put into our washing machine, or dishwashers, where it breaks up the surface tension and all of the interactions between the water molecules in the fluid in the lungs, and that prevents, if we didn't have that surfactant, then water molecules here would be very attractive to water molecules on the opposite side. So we would have an attraction here between these two water molecules, and that would cause the alveolus to collapse so that the water molecules could be right next to each other. It would draw the walls of the alveolus inward. And so surfactant goes in there and it interferes with the bonding that can happen, and it prevents collapse from occurring, so that it will not collapse, and instead stays inflated and ready to do gas exchange. All right, so there we are. We've made it through the structures of the respiratory system. And so in our next chapter, we're going to start looking at how do we get the lungs to inflate so that we can begin this gas exchange process.